I'm Mark Chaffardini, founder and editor of GoSeeTalk.com. I'm here today with Oscar-winning film composer Michael Giacchino. Michael, we're absolutely thrilled to have you in Texas, and we're just overjoyed for this concert that you're going to be conducting in a couple days.
I'm super happy to be here. Just spent the whole day with the orchestra. They were fantastic, a lot of fun. And, I told them when we first got here, we're here only because we want to have fun. This is not, we take the work seriously, but the performance stuff, we want to have fun with the performance and so that the audience has fun. So hopefully that's what will happen.
Now, you're not known to conduct your own music.
Yeah, I'm not known to conduct because generally what happens is while I'm working, I'll be in the booth with the director when we're recording. And I want to sit with the director, like say we're doing Star Trek. I want to be with JJ while we're listening to the music as we're watching it to picture so that both he and I can watch it and go, oh, we should do this, or we could change this, or if we only just did that, and then I can make changes very quickly that way. Whereas if I'm out on the stand conducting at that time, it makes everything last a lot longer. I have to conduct the piece, I have to come back in, listen to it, watch it to picture, have a conversation with JJ, then go back out, change the thing. Whereas if I just do it this way, we can just get it done in no time. So that's kind of how that all started. And I actually prefer to do it that way because, I want the director to be a big part of how this thing is fitting into the film.
Well, something like the Masters of Film, where it's outside of the filmmaking process, is this something you're going to transition into more in the future, of taking the stand?
Yeah, I enjoy it. I do like doing it a lot. And I would conduct a lot on Lost. Actually, the TV stuff was different because, we were doing that week to week, and there was no one from the production at the recording sessions because they were busy working on the next episode. Generally, the only time we saw Damon Lindelof or Carlton Cuse was the very final episode, because by that point they had nothing else to do, no more episodes to prepare for. So that's when we would get to see them. But generally, it's just me and the orchestra and the gang over there recording each thing. So on occasion, I would conduct then, or go in and conduct a Fringe or an Alcatraz or whatever, just for fun. Or if I do concerts like this, I'll conduct. But generally, when I'm working, it's sitting with the director in the booth.
When you are working, what do you find more difficult? Do you find TV or films?
TV is a kind of a nonstop grind. It's an extremely difficult process. For Lost, I was writing 35 minutes of music per week. So and I'd have to write it. And you'd have 3 days to do it. 3 days to write about 35 minutes of music, get it orchestrated, and go in and record it. You're recording on the fourth day. So that's a really intense schedule, and every week it's replaying. You're doing it again and again and again. And Lost was the kind of show that was constantly evolving. So there was always new themes to write, always new characters to deal with. And that's just how TV works generally. So I think as far as just stamina, TV is definitely more difficult. Whereas on a film, I might go 6 to 8 weeks on it, and then you're done. As far as the writing process goes, you would do that for 8 weeks, and then maybe record for a couple weeks, and it's over. So they're different, but like I said, the TV stuff usually will last a whole season, whereas the films you do in one quick shot.
Well, can you talk to me about the editing process? Whereas if you write something and you find out that either the script has changed and you have to adapt your music, does it ever work in the opposite, where you write something and they say, well,
that happens too. That's happened with JJ, where they've put back in a shot that was taken out after hearing how it was written to a previous cut. Sometimes, when you're editing, you're always searching to get it right, and you don't have the final music with you while they're editing. So a lot of times they're making, they're a little bit in the dark. They know what they need to do, but you just don't know until you put everything together. So sometimes once you marry it all together, you go, you know what, that cut we had 3 versions ago that he wrote to is a better cut. Or sometimes it goes the opposite way, where I write a piece of music and we realize, you know what, this would be better if we actually cut out this whole section of music here and maybe had no music during this part and then let the music come back in here. So a lot of it is just you're experimenting always. You write a piece of music, you put it up, and I never like to feel like the thing that I'm writing is the thing that must appear in the film. It's I don't work that way. It's a very collaborative process, and I want to do what's ever best for the story of the film. And I just don't want to be one of those guys that is like, you can't change my music. That is, because that's ridiculous. Filmmaking is a group art form, and unless everyone is working together, you can't get anything done. It's a lot like working in an orchestra. It's a group art form. They all have different tasks and different disciplines that they apply to this one whole sound. So everyone has to kind of work together to get it done.
Well, one of the things you touched on just now is storytelling, but also the fact that, and we touched on this on our phone interview, that filmmaking is something where a lot of trades come together. But filmmaking is something that you gravitated towards at a young age, and people who haven't read your bio might be a shock to them that you wanted to become a filmmaker at a young age.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I was 9 years old, I saw Star Wars, and I, was fascinated by that film. I had grown up up to that point. I loved Ray Harryhausen movies. I loved King Kong. I loved Planet of the Apes. I loved The Muppet Show, things like that. And I was always sort of enamored by that stuff. But it wasn't until Star Wars where my mind started going, wait a minute, how did they do that? And I started trying to figure out how they did certain things, whether it be the stop motion or the blue screen or even just the editing alone. I was fascinated by. And so I got my dad's camera, he let me have it, and I just started making movies since I was 9 years old. And I did that all the way through high school. And at the end of high school, I went to film school. In New York City, I went to the School of Visual Arts and studied filmmaking. And I got a degree in filmmaking there. And it wasn't until after that that I started taking music more seriously. I always loved music, always played piano, and I always had fun making up my own compositions on the piano. But I never thought to myself at that point that I was going to be writing music for movies. It was just something I liked, and my dad had a great record collection. So I was obsessed with anything that was instrumental, and then of course Star Wars came, and I got for Christmas I got the Star Wars 2 record set, and I wore that thing out completely. And that was fantastic. I loved listening to that and trying to figure out, wait, what's this sound? What's that sound? And the wonderful thing about that album was there were liner notes that explained sort of the underpinnings of all of the music, saying, in this track, Luke is swinging across the chasm, and you hear the French horns playing Luke's theme. And I'm like, oh, that sound is a French horn. Okay, and I would scour, what's another thing? They would say, okay, an oboe plays as the Jawas are carrying R2-D2 to the thing. I was like, oh, that's an oboe. So it was the beginning of me piecing together those sounds that I had heard growing up, which I had just assumed was one big, massive sound, and never really thought of the individuality of each of those sounds. It was the first time I actually looked at it and go, French horns, oboe, violins, violas, cellos. And then I started in the recordings realizing that, wait a minute, the cellos are always on the right in my recordings that I'm listening to, and then the violins you hear on the left. And then you can hear, depending on the composer or the engineer, the violas either in the center or sort of off center towards the right. French horns were always to the left. Trumpets, trombones were on the right. Percussion center. So all those things you start realizing, and it was just like a really fun sort of revelation for me to kind of figure that all out. But like I said, it wasn't until after college that I started taking it more seriously, studying theory and orchestration and all of that.
And you went to Juilliard.
I did. I spent some time at Juilliard before moving out to California, and while I was there, studied theory and composition. And then when I went to Los Angeles, I continued studying at UCLA, and I did all their night classes there. And I had a teacher, his name was Don Ray, and he had written a lot of music for the old Hawaii Five-0 series, which I loved, and he was a great teacher. He passed away a few years ago, but I was lucky to have him as my teacher because I watched Hawaii Five-0 growing up. I really enjoyed it, and being able to kind of hear from him the stories of how they did it and what it was like to write to picture. That to me was an important kind of class that I had during that time, and he was a great teacher to have.
As you transitioned from school to, you worked at DreamWorks Interactive for a time, and you sort of made your big break at DreamWorks, and that's how you met JJ Abrams. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, at the time, I didn't want to be a starving artist. I didn't want to be sending, I had no interest in sending CDs out just blindly sending CDs out to everyone saying, here, listen to my demos, which were not very good at the time, I decided to get a job within the industry somewhere, and it didn't even have to do with music. Since I made films all growing up with the film school, I was interested in producing as well. So I started producing video games, first at Disney, then later at DreamWorks. And I thought, well, at some point during that process, I'll meet somebody that I got to meet that'll allow me the chance to do what I want to do, which is start writing music for some of these things. And that happened after about a year on the job. They started realizing, oh, he writes music and he does this and that. And they let me build a music studio at Disney. And they let me score a game called Maui Mallard, which was this game they were doing for the Super Nintendo. And so I got my start there. But then when I went to DreamWorks, some of the guys I worked with at Disney had also gone over to DreamWorks. And so when they were building this, they're making the game for The Lost World for Steven Spielberg. He was shooting the movie The Lost World at the time that they were developing the video game. He would come over to the studio all the time at DreamWorks and just want to see how things were going. He was very fascinated with video games. He played them with his kids. He loved them. So he became a big part of the development of that company, that video game division at the time. And so they had a big show for him one day. They're finally going to show him, okay, here's a level that's sort of finished. It has some final animation in it, it has some sound effects, and they needed some music for it. So they asked me, the meeting was in a day or two. They said, could you just write a piece of music for this? And I said, sure, I'll write something. So I wrote a piece of music. They threw it into the game. I went about my business on the project that I was working on, which was doomed to be canceled. And 2 days later, I got this phone call, and they said, can you come downstairs? Steven wants to talk to you. And I was like, Steven who? Who's Steven? And they're like, Steven Spielberg, our boss. And I was like, oh, really? So I went down, and there he was at the bottom of the escalator waiting for me. And I'll never forget that moment, because it really was like a moment out of one of his films, because as I was on the escalator and there was it was difficult, because I was trying to decide, when you're on an escalator and someone's at the bottom waiting for you, what do? Do you walk down the stairs on the escalator as it's moving, or do you just stand still and move down like this? It was one of those things. So I chose to just stand still and just play it cool and wait for him. And he's just down there looking at me, and I'm coming down to him. And as I'm getting closer to him, I'm watching this frame and like this. I'm thinking to myself, oh, this is like a shot out of one of his movies, where he just kind of pushes in. And there, next thing you know, his hand was out, and I was shaking his hand. He was like, I love the music you did for the game on the level. Are you going to write the rest of the score? And I said, sure, I'm going to do that. And I didn't know if I was or not, but sure, I'll do that. And he said, we're going to do it with a live orchestra too. Now, up to that time, I had not recorded with a live orchestra. I'd always wanted to. That is all I ever wanted, because that's what I grew up listening to. And at the same time, the CFO and the CEO of DreamWorks Interactive had said, prior to Steven's arrival, no, there will be no live orchestra recording. It's too expensive, and you will use synthesizers. So however it was going to be done, it was going to be done on synth. But when Steven said those words, you're going to do this with a live orchestra, right? The CEO and the CFO were on either side of him. Both were immediately, yes, of course we are. Yes, we're going to do that. And I was just standing there like, I can't believe this is happening. And then I was like, and they looked at me like, right, Michael, we're getting that all set up. I was like, yeah, I'm working on it right now. And Steve was like, yeah, that'll be great, because it has to be done with a live orchestra, because in his world, that's the way you do it. He has that sensibility. He loves music probably more than anyone I've ever met, and has a knowledge of film music that will astound you. And not just film music, it goes into classical music, it goes into like experimental. He's so smart and just so loving of musicians and what they do and what they bring to the table. It's no wonder that to him, oh no, music is done this way. This is how we do music in movies, And of course, that's why he loves John Williams so much, and that's why we all love John Williams so much, is, he feels the same way. So for me, those guys were my mentors growing up. Those are the people I always looked to, and they were my indirect teachers of everything that I believe in today. So it was just kismet that happened that day. And from then on, then he asked me to do Medal of Honor, and the orchestras kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then he recommended me for a TV show. He got me my agent. That's another crazy story. I was doing all these video games, and I was trying to, how can I get into TV or film? I really wanted to do, stuff to picture, right to picture. And I was kind of depressed at the time, thinking I'll never get there, because everyone I went to, if I went on a meeting to meet on a film or something, they would look at me and say, you know what, you can't do this, you're a video game guy. And this was endless. This happened endlessly. And then I was sitting in my office and the phone rings, and I answer, and she goes, hey, this is Susan over in Steven's office. Steven's on the other line. He's on the Sony scoring stage with John Williams and his agent, Mike Orfane. And he wants to know, would you mind if he introduced you to Mike Orfane? Because he's been telling him all about you, and he wants you guys to meet, and he thinks you guys would be a good match. And I was like, yeah, that would be great. And I hung up thinking, no, he'll never call. And of course, first thing next morning, Mike called me and said, I was with Steven yesterday, and he was speaking so highly of you. He wants us to meet. We should get together. So I went, I met with him, and he became my agent. And then shortly after that, completely unrelated, JJ Abrams called me and just asked if I wanted to meet with him and talk about this show he was doing for ABC. And what had happened with him was he had just played all those video games that I worked on. So he and his friends had played those games, and his friend Jesse Alexander was also a soundtrack nut and had bought all the soundtracks to the Medal of Honor games and gave them to JJ and said, JJ, you should listen to this. We should talk to him about Alias. And JJ listened to it and liked it, and then called me up, and we met, and that was it. And then we've been doing everything together ever since. And then, of course, the big end of the story is working on Super 8, where you have Steven Spielberg producing, J.J. Abrams directing, and I was writing the music. So that was kind of a nice sort of cap to what began back in 1996, actually, on The Lost World. So that's the long version of the story.
That was awesome, because in a way you got to do something that was very nostalgic, working on from your stop motion.
Absolutely.
You're working on a big budget film like Super 8, and then you're working with one of your heroes. Yeah. So I mean,
JJ and I would look at each other all the time during the making of that film and go, can you believe this? Can you believe that we get to do this? That we're working with him? That they're letting us do this? I mean, we always kind of marvel at the fact that we're allowed to do what we do. That someone actually lets us do this. Every time we're on the set and I'm watching and he's blowing something up, he looks at me back and goes, can you believe they let us do this? They're crazy, Because for us, it's just this very kind of boyish love of creating something. That's what it all comes down to. We just love making stuff, and it's really fun. And when I work with him, it's like working with my friends when I was 10. There's no limit to what you can, if you can figure out how to do it, then figure out how to do it. That's the kind of the creative angle to everything. And it just makes life more fun. It makes work more fun, that's for sure.
On that note, let's talk about your creative process. When do you usually come into a project, and what's your criteria for taking a project?
My criteria is simple. I have a rule, hard and fast rule. No, I don't work with people who are not nice. I could say it in a little harsher way, I usually do, but I'll just say I don't work for mean people or people who are, selfish or narcissistic or any of that. If I sense any of that, I will stay away from it altogether. Because life's too short, I don't want to be involved in something where I have to deal with people that are a pain in the butt. And which is why I work so closely with JJ and Brad Bird and Pete Docter and everyone at Pixar. I have recurring projects with these same directors all the time because we have a lot of fun together. And it's taught me that, I love what I do, and if I'm not going to love it while I'm doing it, then don't do it. To me, money never plays into the whole thing. Even if I'm saying no to a decent paycheck, it's worth the peace of mind knowing that you don't have to suffer for something you love to do, because I don't want that to ruin this thing that I like, So first thing is first, who is it that I'm working with, and what are they like? What kind of person are they? Now, so for a long time, I didn't step outside of that circle of people that I have worked with until Speed Racer was one of the first times, and the Wachowski brothers, called and asked to meet with me, and I was like, I just didn't know. I had no clue what kind of people they were and all that. So I was very tentative about it. But when I went to Chicago to meet with them, instantly I fell in love with them. They were the greatest people on earth, and they are such a family-oriented group that it's just wonderful to work with them. So those are the kind of people that I like seek out. Those are the people I want to work with. So there's that. Then the other side of the coin is the project something that I'm going to be interested in and inspired by? That has to be there too. If it's not something that I'm interested in or will be sort of inspired by, then I have to say no, because it's very hard to write on something. For me, it's very hard to work on something I'm not interested in. You know, if then it just becomes a job. And if I just wanted a job, I could go back to selling stereos at 34th Street in New York City at Macy's, or I used to sell stereos there at Macy's, or I go back to delivering beer or being a janitor or whatever. Well, all those things I used to do while I was, making my way to do what I'm doing now. I might as well go do that, because those are uninteresting things to me at the time, but I was doing it just to get by. So I just don't want to go back to that. So those are the two things I really look at.
Okay. In our interview, you said that you focus a lot on story. That's important to you because it not only inspires you, but it's where you draw your material from. It's inspiration. Do you get a script and read it? And do you get a vibe from it that this is something that I really gravitate towards?
I try not to read scripts if I don't. I will read them for JJ because he's always looking for feedback as to what's working, what's not working. So for him, I love to do that. It's fine. But generally, I try not to read them because I read a script, and coming from a filmmaking background and someone who has made movies and gone to film school and all of that, when I read a script, I'm envisioning it how I would make the film. And then what happens generally is then I go see the film once they finished it, and I go, well, this is nothing what I thought it would be. I would have done, so I don't want to do all that work in my head of figuring out the music I would write for the music that I think that they will make. I might as well just wait to see the film that they made and then decide, what music should be done for it. That's a much easier process. It's a little different now in Star Trek, the second Star Trek, because we've already set up the first one. So, reading this script I know the vernacular already of the music. So that's a little different. But generally coming into something new, I try not to read it, just want to wait to see it.
Sometimes if you're writing something for a video game, do you play the games in advance?
I stink at video games. I'm terrible. I've never... The only video game I've ever played that I worked on was the very first Medal of Honor, and I only made it to the first level, and I got killed, and that was it, and I never went back to it again. So I've never played those games. What I enjoyed about those games most was the history behind those games, understanding what it was important to Steven at the time that those things be historically researched and the characters really kind of brought to the forefront of the game, as opposed to it just being about going around shooting Nazis, which in itself, not so bad, I suppose. But you always want something more. You want something emotional. You want a reason to care. Why do I care? That's you're always constantly asking yourself that. Why do I care? And if you can find a reason to care, it makes it much easier to work on something and write about it. So Medal of Honor, I love the historical aspect of those games because we did a tremendous amount of research on those and interviews and talking to veterans, and it was fascinating. And we actually went into the field training and all of these things. It was an amazing experience. So it wasn't hard for me to draw material for those projects because of what we went through in order to kind of make them. So.
But interesting. When you approach something like you led us up with Star Trek, what is your approach towards scoring something that is original versus something that's existing material? For instance, you worked on Mission Impossible 2, 3, and 4, which had Lalo Schifrin. And who did the first one? I think it was Danny Elfman and then Hans Zimmer. So you're following what someone has laid before you, even with the Pixar movies. Yeah. So I'm rambling too. So what is your approach to something?
Like on something like Mission Impossible, Lalo Schifrin is a hero to me. I love that guy. He is an incredible composer, and arguably the theme he wrote for that show back in the 60s is probably the best television show theme ever, and to be able to, it's a gift to be given something like that, to have fun and to play with, so I was very excited. And I remember on the first Mission Impossible film, I play with that theme as much as I would have liked to have, because the subject matter of the film was one where, Ethan Hunt, Tom Cruise's character, his wife was kidnapped, and it was about him trying to find his wife. So it was very serious and dark kind of a story, even though it had a lot of fun elements in it. The core was this very kind of serious thing he had to do in getting his wife. Whereas the second one was a little bit more, I guess the tone of maybe an Indiana Jones film, was a lot more adventure going on, and I could have a lot more fun with Brad Bird's Mission Impossible. So I used the theme in there a lot more. So it really depends on what the story is doing. If the story is allowing for the use of those previous themes that were written, then I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to use it. But if it's not, then I try to stay away from it, because I don't want to get in the way of what the story needs.
Okay. When you are scoring and you're developing this up front, do you take a macro or a micro approach?
The first thing you do is take a wide view of what you're doing, because what you want is an emotional stretch. You want to look and go, ultimately, how am I supposed to feel at the end of this thing? How's it supposed to make me feel? If you go in and do all these little micro little experiments, and nothing really links up together. So the first thing you want to do is figure out, what's the emotion behind this thing? What's the core emotion? Once you track that, once you figure that out, everything else falls into place. So it's always good to get a big picture view of something. It's why before you write a script, you write a treatment first. You're getting all of the emotional beats down that you want to cover. And whereas sometimes if you go right to a script, it's very technical, and you have a tendency to kind of skip over some emotional stuff, where you can't avoid skipping the emotional stuff when you're with the treatment, because it's supposed to tell you how you're feeling at every step of the way. That's what it's like with film scoring. You want to know how you're feeling first.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about how you think you've progressed. The milestones you've made. What kind of personal achievements have you come to?
Well, I don't know. It's nice to be able to be here, like for something like this in Dallas, doing this concert, to get to a point where you feel like, hey, I have a body of work that I can actually bring somewhere, and we can perform it and have a great time doing it. And I think the thing I'm even more proud of is that the work is related to these sort of big kind of, I don't want to say pop culture, but pop culture, projects like Star Trek or The Incredibles or Ratatouille or any of those things. Up. I mean, these are things that people really relate to. People enjoy. They remember when they went and saw Up. They remember when they went and saw Star Trek. It's not just like a throwaway film that they went and saw and they'll never think of again. I'm very proud of the fact that I work with people that work very hard to make these things last and make them entertaining for the audience. In Mission Impossible 4, Tom Cruise scales the Burj there in Dubai, right? He really did that. He actually did that. So when he came to the session, he always would visit the sessions when we're recording. And I was like, what did you do that for? And his answer is basically, because if people know it's me up there, they're going to be more concerned for the character and more tense about what is happening in the film, as opposed to if it's just a stunt double or a CG effect, they'll know that, they can feel that, so they're not going to be as hooked into what's happening. He goes, but if it's really me doing it, he goes, I feel like I'm drawing them into the story more, and people pay a lot of money to go see these movies. He wants to give them their money's worth. So he's a guy who really cares about what the audience is receiving. He wants them to get what they came to see. He wants to entertain them in the best way possible, which I like that attitude. And he's probably one of the hardest working people I've ever met in my life. But the kind of hard work that you really look up to and go, wow, that is great. And he's nice to everybody, and it's pretty amazing. But those kind of people, those are the kind of people I like working with. People who actually care about what they're making. Not the people that are like, oh, God, when are we going to be done with this? Is it almost done? I'm going to go home. You want to work with the people that are just so excited about what they're doing, they cannot wait to show somebody.
Well, this has been a very good cross-section, of how you do what you do. Well, what's next for you? Can you talk to us a little bit about your projects and, maybe your future goals or wish list collaborations?
You know what? I don't know. I feel like I feel like I've done everything I could have ever wished for. Like when I look at the films that I got to do and the people that I've got to work with, I feel somewhat, I feel like I took all the good stuff from a lot of other people in a way. I'm very proud of my relationship with the directors that I work with. I learned so much from them. I feel like they're the best in the business, and I'm constantly learning just by being around them. So for me, all I hope is that as I move forward, I can just keep learning how to be better at what I do, and how to just keep listening to people, never stop listening to people or listening to criticism. One of the things that we always promised each other was, no matter what, however we feel, just say it. It doesn't matter. If I don't like the way something is playing, I can say it. If JJ doesn't like the way something I'm doing is playing, he can say it. And we are never, ever upset about what the comment or anything is, because we're all just trying to make something great. So for me, my wish is if we can continue being like that, I will feel like I've succeeded. It's not so much about the next project I want to work on or climbing some mountain one day or anything like that. It's just about, being honest with ourselves and each other. And if we can keep doing that, I'll feel like then I'm good.
Excellent. Well, last question. You're really great at what you do, but at the end of the day, it's your job and your passion. So how do you unwind? What do you like to do? What kind of music do you gravitate toward?
I listen to the Beatles incessantly. I love the Beatles. I love all kinds of music. There's no bounds to the music that I listen to. It goes from, mariachi music to polka music, to the Beatles, to symphonic music, to Benny Goodman, Louis Prima, whatever. I love it all, so I'll listen to pretty much anything. But I try to lead a balanced life. I try to work from 8:30 to 5:30, and that's it. I try not to work weekends, and I try not to work nights. Occasionally you have to do it because of a schedule. But the general rule of thumb is 5:30, done work. Go downstairs, hang out with the kids, play with them, spend the weekends with the kids, do that, and just sort of, to create a balanced life, because it's very easy to just say yes to every bit of work that comes your way. And one of the hardest things to learn is how to say no. Getting to comfortable enough to say, no, I don't have to do that, because this other stuff is as important, if not more, than the work that you do. So the time you spend with your friends, the time you spend with your family, all of that that's sort of very sacred time. So I try to keep it balanced.
Great attitude, great words to live by. Michael, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
We're thrilled for your concert and can't wait to see it.
Great. Thank you. We'll have a good time.